Title: They knew the 100 billion yuan's skyblock was cracking during construction, and they sold the penthouses anyway. Visual: fast high-contrast B-roll of ultra-luxury glass towers piercing the Shanghai skyline. Cold cyan filter. Text flashes on screen. Total sales: 20 million thousand. An ominous drone notation drops narrator. Somewhere between the first internal draft and the final. Legally binding purchase contract used to sell ultra-luxury apartments at the Pinnacle, Shanghai. A towering monument of wealth rising over 500 meters above the Huangpi River. A single, critical phrase was quietly altered. The early language drafted by the engineering team was absolute. It stated clearly that the building's specialized high-strength concrete exterior framework will prevent water penetration. But in the final document handed to buyers, that line was scrubbed. The new text read that the facade was designed to prevent water penetration. Will prevent became designed to prevent. 3 words swapped in for one, according to a massive multi-volume civil lawsuit filed in the Shanghai People's Court. That tiny edit was not a typographical error. It was not standard administrative housekeeping by corporate lawyers. The newly formed Homeowners Committee alleges it was the exact moment the developers of the most expensive residential megatower in East Asia stopped promising the building would actually keep the elements out, because behind closed doors, they already knew it couldn't. This is the construction files, and this is document number 9. Today's file is radically different from the ones that came before it. Today, we are not just asking whether the Pinnacle Shanghai is cracking and settling into the soft alluvial soil of the Yangtze River Delta. We already covered the structural fissures. We covered the internal flooding, the severe aerodynamic swaying, and the high-speed elevator emergency entrapments that terrified China's ultra-wealthy elite. Today, we are asking a much colder, more calculating question. The exact question wealthy buyers are now forcing executives to answer under oath. Who knew? When did they know it? And what did they do with that knowledge while 20 billion yuan in luxury real estate went out the door? The 20 million thousand paper trail here is what the official court record shows. The Homeowners Committee of the Pinnacle Shanghai launched a devastating, comprehensive lawsuit against the megaproject's primary developer, Jinhua Land Development Group. Its billionaire chairman, Mr. Li Jian, the project's main architectural institute, and the state-tier engineering consultancy tasked with supervising the build. The complaint doesn't just ask for a staggering 1.2 billion yen in direct damages. It demands unprecedented punitive compensation on top. And the core allegation here is complete, lie-shifting the landscape of luxury construction scandals in China. This isn't just a standard dispute over construction defects or delayed handover times. That battle has been raging since the tower first exhibited major water ingress. The brand new allegation is deliberate, calculated, and far-reaching commercial fraud. The Homeowners Committee claims that Zhengulan Group and Chairman Li knew about widespread, systemic cracking throughout the tower's structural concrete framework during the peak construction phase, and then systematically concealed it. They concealed it from the wealthy corporate tycoons and tech billionaires buying the units. And, according to the legal filing, they intentionally concealed it from the Municipal Housing Bureau and the local construction commission's engineer inspector. Let me put a definitive number on the word widespread, because this channel runs on hard data, not descriptive adjectives. According to the comprehensive independent forensic filing, a drone-assisted laser facade survey identified exactly 1,893 individual structural and material defects across the tower's exterior. 1893. That specific figure matters immensely for a legal reason. The lawsuit alleges that when an official compliance report was submitted to the local district housing and urban rural development bureau describing the condition of the exterior skin, that letter directly misrepresented the true nature, spatial extent, and severity of the concrete cracking. It completely omitted the independent survey's catastrophic findings. In plain language, the residents are alleging that Chinese municipal regulators were handed a thoroughly sanitized, politically safe picture of a flawless structural icon, while the terrifying reality sat buried in a locked corporate file. The developer's defense now. Before we dive deeper into the blueprints, let's establish the standard legal baseline. And on this specific file, it matters more than usual. Everything I have just detailed is an active allegation in an ongoing civil lawsuit. Zhenhua Land Development Group and its subsidiaries have not been found liable for fraud by a court of law. In preliminary hearings, the developer's legal team publicly defended the Pinnacle Shanghai, calling it the crown jewel of Shanghai's modern architectural renaissance, and stating that the skyscraper's structural core has performed remarkably well under extreme load parameters. The defendants will have their day in court. That initial legal battle has already generated more than 2 million pages of technical documents, structural sensor logs, and concrete pour receipts. That tells you exactly how fiercely both sides are fighting. What we are doing today is reading the owner's side of the paper trail, because in high-rise engineering, the paper trail is the story. To truly comprehend how a 500-meter vertical fortress gets sold to the public while an internal defect list grows exponentially in the background, you have to rewind the clock. You have to look at what the Pinnacle Shanghai was originally engineered to be. The chronology of a virginal, animally visual, animated, textured blueprint of the Shanghai skyline. A digital Shanghai's slide is upward from 0 to 500 meters. Timestamps flash rapidly on the side of the screen. 2011, 2012, 2013 narrator. Rewind to the early 2010s. The mega luxury waterfront high-rise market in Shanghai is entering an era of unprecedented hypergrowth. Zhenhua Land Development Group, under the aggressive leadership of Chairman Li Jian, assembles a massive high-density plot right on the edge of the financial district. The structural blueprint delivered by the Architectural Institute is radical, uncompromising, and terrifyingly ambitious, a pure, exposed white high-strength concrete grid rising 118 stories into the clouds. Unbelievably slender, it boasts an extreme height-to-width aspect ratio of 15:1. To visualize what that means from an engineering perspective, a standard wooden pencil has a ratio of roughly 30:1. The Pinnacle Shanghai is, structurally speaking, half a pencil standing perfectly balanced on its tip over a dense, multi-layered urban metropolis built on soft, shifting riverbed silt. And right here is the critical engineering decision from which every single disaster in this document trail flows. On the Pinnacle, that exposed white concrete grid you see from the ground is not decorative cladding. It is not an aesthetic curtain wall. It is the primary structural skeleton. The exterior grid is engineered to carry the immense vertical gravitational load of the tower, while simultaneously acting as its sole protective skin against the violent typhoon winds and lashing rainstorms of the East China Sea. The millimeter critique this means every single structural fissure in that concrete is not a cosmetic blemish on a non-load-bearing window panel. It is a physical failure in a structural element that stands as the only line of defense between a 200 million yuan luxury duplex and a high-velocity rainstorm a quarter mile in the sky. Let's dive into the structural logs because the chronological T-line of this concrete pour is where the developer's defense begins to fracture. March 2012. Groundbreaking begins. Heavy equipment pumps thousands of cubic meters of specialized C60 self-consolidating concrete into the deep foundation piles to stabilize the tower against subsurface soil settlement. August 2013. The core reaches the 30th floor. Sensor data from the China Academy of Building Research-style monitoring rigs starts throwing anomalies. The tower is experiencing differential vertical settlement. The concrete core and the exterior columns are compressing at slightly different rates. January 2014. The structural framework reaches the 65th floor. Internal engineering logs note the appearance of fine, hairline cracks running through the exterior load-bearing nodes. When water penetrates cracked concrete, it immediately targets the high-tensile steel rebar matrix embedded deep inside. Steel exposed to moisture oxidizes and corrodes. As it corrodes, it undergoes a devastating physical transformation. It expands up to 6 times its original volume. This internal expansion exerts immense pressure on the surrounding concrete, causing it to spall, fracture, and break away entirely. Engineers call this destructive feedback loop the concrete cancer cycle. It is an engineering nightmare, and it is the absolute last phrase you want associated with a multi-billion yuan asset. The Yakit. Grade fix. According to the April 2025 court filing, the internal warnings from the engineering team started early, and they were explicit. The lawsuit alleges that during the 2014 structural phase, the project's chief structural engineers raised urgent flags regarding the high-velocity microcracking occurring on the windward facade. They recommended halting the vertical pour to apply an expensive heavy-duty elastomeric protective coating, a flexible, advanced polymer compound engineered to bridge structural gaps and form an impenetrable barrier against water ingress. But according to the internal memos leaked into the lawsuit, Zhenhua Land Group faced immense pressure to hit their strict pre-sale deadlines and maximize corporate liquidity. Halting the pour meant missing the high-profile autumn sales window, and buried on page 24 of the complaint is a stunning, highly specific detail regarding Chairman Li Jian himself. When presented with the multi-million yuan cost of the elastomeric coating system, Chairman Li reportedly rejected the engineering recommendation. Instead, the lawsuit alleges he suggested treating the structural cracks with a clear, commercial-grade silicone water repellent, a material identical to the transparent sealant used on his personal luxury yacht berthed at the Shanghai Marina, a yacht sealant. The homeowner's legal team highlighted this specific technical detail for a profound reason. A clear marine silicone is designed for cosmetic maintenance and quick gloss finishes. An elastomeric engineering coating is designed for long-term structural survivability. The complaint's core argument is that given a direct choice between the long-term durability of the structural skeleton and the immediate, pristine visual presentation of the tower for high-net-worth buyers, the developers deliberately chose short-term appearance over structural longevity. The sanitized report by mid-2005 as the tower neared its grand structural topping-out ceremony. The internal defect log had grown from a few scattered notes into an extensive multi-page database. The independent drone survey commissioned by the subcontractors tracked thousands of micro-fissures spreading across the high-altitude concrete columns. Yet, when the mandatory structural safety filings were prepared for the municipal construction inspectors to clear the tower for its final occupancy permit, the documentation underwent a dramatic filtering process. The lawsuit alleges that the formal report submitted to the authorities completely reclassified the structural cracks as standard, minor curing shrinkage, effectively giving the local housing bureau a completely clear, risk-free assessment. With the regulatory green light secured based on that sanitized paperwork, the sales machinery moved into overdrive. The developer opened the gilded doors of the sales center, unleashing one of the most aggressive, high-stakes luxury marketing campaigns ever witnessed in the domestic real estate market. Unbeknownst to the buyer stepping onto the Italian marble floors of the presentation hall, they were looking at a building whose legal shield had already been quietly re-engineered from will prevent to designed to prevent. The countdown to the first major storm had already begun. The macro-condensed map of mainland China on a glowing screen. Red pinpoints light up across several massive hub cities, Tianjin, Shenzhen, Chongqing, and Wuhan. Recent news headlines flash in Mandarin with English subtitles. Curtain wall exclusion zones, soil settlement corrections. Narrator. To fully grasp why the structural failure of the Pinnacle Shanghai has sent shockwaves through the entire domestic real estate market, you have to look past this single coordinate on the Huangpi River. You have to look at the broader, high-stakes landscape of Chinese megatall engineering over the last 15 years. The Pinnacle Shanghai is not an isolated incident. It is the crowning example of a systemic, structural trend that engineering institutes from Shenzhen to Beijing have been tracking behind closed doors for a decade. China's rapid urban expansion created the most vertically dense skyline on Earth. But when you build at this unprecedented speed, across varied geological profiles, the margin for engineering error drops to absolute zero. The geological reality of the Huangpulets talk about the hard geography of where this tower stands. Shanghai is built on an alluvial plain, essentially centuries of soft, wet mud and silt deposited by the Yangtze River. The structural engineering required to anchor a 500-meter, 118-story concrete skyscraper into this type of ground is completely different from anchoring a tower into the solid bedrock of a mountain range to keep a megastructure like the Pinnacle from sinking or tilting. Engineers must drive massive steel and concrete foundation piles deep into the earth, sometimes over 80 meters down, hoping to reach a stable sand layer. But when a building has an extreme 15-to-1 aspect ratio, the environmental forces acting upon it are immense. The wind loads at 400 meters high act like a giant lever, constantly pushing and pulling the tower, trying to rock it back and forth on its soft foundation. This creates a phenomenon known as differential soil settlement. If the soil beneath one side of the tower compresses even a few millimeters more than the other, the entire structure begins to lean. And when a 500-meter tower leans by even a fraction of a degree, the physical stress placed on the load-bearing concrete facade increases exponentially, parallels. Across the squilines, look at what happened in Shenzhen with the infamous structural swaying incidents of its high-rise commercial sectors, where wind vortex shedding and underground transit vibrations caused towers to flex beyond their design tolerances, forcing emergency evacuations. Look at the megatall residential projects in Tianjin and Chongqing, where developers raced to complete massive concrete frames before the concrete had fully cured under optimal climate conditions, resulting in long-term structural deformation. In Wuhan, engineering teams had to deploy massive counterweight systems and foundation grouting to correct subsurface shifting that threatened the structural integrity of waterfront office blocks. The core engineering difference between those global structural panics and the Pinnacle Shanghai comes down to a fundamental architectural design flaw. In those other cities, the towers utilized a standard non-structural glass curtain wall. If the building shifted, the glass might crack or pop out of its aluminum tracks, but the primary internal steel and concrete columns remained intact. At the Pinnacle, because the architect chose a radical, exposed concrete grid to serve as the building's actual skeleton. Any structural deformation caused by wind or soil settlement manifests directly as a crack in the exterior load-bearing columns. The urban canyon effect there is another structural factor that almost nobody covers when analyzing Chinese skyscraper fail. The urban canyon effect. When you cluster multiple mega towers together in close proximity, you create an intentional aerodynamic funnel. Wind hitting the face of these towers doesn't just pass by. It accelerates down the narrow streets between them, creating high-velocity wind shears that slam into the concrete facades with forces far exceeding standard meteorological models, according to technical briefs filed by the China Academy of Building Research. The localized wind pressures acting on the upper third of the Pinnacle Shanghai during seasonal typhoons were up to 35% higher than the baseline models used during the initial 2011 design phase. When you combine shifting alluvial soil under the founda, extreme high-velocity wind funneling around the facade, and an exposed, uninsulated concrete skeleton that absorbs every temperature swing from freezing winters to blistering summers, you create a perfect physical matrix for material failure. The concrete grid expands and contracts constantly. If the concrete mix isn't absolutely perfect, or if the curing process was rushed to meet financial quarters, microfissures are guaranteed to form. The independent engineering firms representing the wealthy owners argue that the developers weren't blind to these geographical and structural realities. They had access to the same advanced simulation software as the structural institutes. The 2025 fraud lawsuit alleges that Zhenhua Land Development Group fully understood that the extreme geometry of their tower required absolute material perfection and long-term maintenance, yet they treated the building's primary structural skeleton like a standard low-rise residential brick wall, expecting a coat of clear yacht-grade silicone to defy the immense physical forces of a Shanghai storm. The paper trail proves that while the concrete was quietly tearing itself apart under the stress of these environmental forces, the corporate entity, was focused entirely on maintaining a flawless marketing narrative to ensure the final tranche of billionaire buyers wired their funds before the reality became impossible to hide. The human and financial casualties of the 90th floor visual. Dramatic low-angle drone footage tracking up the smooth white surface of the Pinnacle Shanghai. The camera closely approached a severe, jagged crack spanning several meters along a chimera concrete node overlay text, K's file no, 2025-04A. Cold sound effect of wind whistling through a narrow gap narrator. To fully comprehend the sheer scale of the crisis unfolding inside the Pinnacle Shanghai, we have to look past the macro-level engineering data and the corporate boardroom memos. We have to look at the ground reality of the people who actually traded their fortunes for a piece of the sky. When you purchase a residential property for 150 million yuan, you expect an unshakable fortress, a sanctuary floating safely above the noise and pollution of the city. Instead, the buyers of this tower found themselves living inside a massive, talking structural experiment that began talking louder and louder with every passing season. Let's talk about some of the specific personal accounts and corporate profiles, detailing the physical chaos inside the structure, as documented in the sworn depositions filed with the Shanghai People's Court. The evacuation of the duplex. Consider the testimony of Mr. Chen Wei, a prominent venture capitalist who acquired a sprawling, high-altitude duplex on the 92nd floor of the tower during the initial pre-sale phase. According to his official statement, the structural warning signs did not manifest as slow, subtle shifts. They arrived with the sudden, violent force of a localized industrial accident during a severe autumn typhoon in late 2019, as high-velocity wind gusts slammed into the building's windward facade. Mr. Chen and his family were awakened by a series of deep, resonant structural groans reverberating through the floorboards as the slender tower flexed under the immense aerodynamic loads, a design feature intended to dissipate energy. The movement exceeded the physical tolerances of the interior finishes, with a sound described as a gunshot. The premium floor-to-ceiling tempered glass panels in his living room buckled under the compressive stress of the shifting concrete framework. The glass did not merely crack, it shattered inward, exposing the multi-million yuan interior to torrential, high-pressure rain and gale-force winds a quarter-mile above the street. The family was forced to flee down the emergency stairwells in pitch darkness because the high-speed elevator shafts had already automatically shut down. The building's internal sensors had detected that the vertical guide rails were twisting out of alignment as the tower swayed. Billion yuan fell LED. The internal structural damage was not confined to a single luxury unit. The 2025 lawsuit contains an exhaustive, floor-by-floor damage assessment that reads like a post-disaster survey, because the structural concrete framework serves as both the building's skeleton and its exterior skin. The water finding its way through those 1,893 documented exterior defects did not just sit in the walls. It traveled, water migrating through the concrete fissures, encountered the tower's complex, high-pressure domestic plumbing network. The minor structural shifts and continuous microvibrations caused by the building's aerodynamic swaying placed immense mechanical stress on the vertical pipe risers. In May 2021, a primary water riser on the 84th floor ruptured completely under the strain. Thousands of liters of pressurized water cascaded down the interior core of the building for over 6 hours before municipal emergency crews could isolate the main valve. The resulting deluge completely destroyed the delicate mechanical controls of the high-speed elevator banks, trapping dozens of residents on the upper floors with zero vertical mobility. Luxury units belonging to tech executives, notable media personalities, and manufacturing magnates were completely ruined. Imported stone finishes warped, customized smart home automation systems short-circuited, and structural drywall dissolved into slurry. The estimated direct property damage from that single internal flooding event exceeded 320 million yen. The anatomy of a collapse. Let's look at the financial math, because this is where the crisis transforms from engineering failure into an absolute, unprecedented slaughter of private wealth. This channel runs on hard, unyielding numbers. And the resale data coming out of the Pinnacle Shanghai provides the cleanest, most terrifying dataset in the history of luxury high-rise real estate. Before the structural defects became public knowledge, the tower's ultra-exclusive duplex penthouse was marketed to international tycoons with an asking price of 1.1 billion yens, making it one of the most expensive single residential listings on Earth. As rumors of the structural cracking and elevator failures began to leak into the commercial real estate sector, the price was slashed to 850 million yen, then to 600 million yen. According to official property registry filings, the unit finally traded hands at a staggering bottom-barrel price of 450 million yen. The seller was forced to absorb a historic, direct capital loss of over 600 million yens on a single transaction, a financial hit larger than the entire construction budget of an ordinary residential neighborhood. Unit type original sponsor price recent. Realized resifelaries loss sarched. Decline 90. Floor penthouse Zhou 1,100,000. Ibza Zhou 650 was Ibza Gen 59%. 82nd floor. Duplexio 280. Zhipchen 43%. 65th. Floor standard. Geneverjo 145 Zin 32%. This is not a reflection of standard macroeconomic market softness. This is a highly specific structural risk discount. Real estate appraisers and high net worth wealth managers across Asia now have a specific court docket number to attach to any valuation within the tower. The exclusion zones and airborne debris danger wasn't just internal. By 2024, the structural degradation of the exposed concrete facade reached a point where it posed a direct physical threat to the dense commercial streets below. As the concrete cancer feedback loop accelerated, small chunks of the white structural concrete began to spall and break away from the upper levels. A piece of concrete weighing a mere 500 grams, if dropped from a height of 400 meters, hits the pavement at terminal velocity, carrying enough kinetic energy to crush a vehicle or penetrate a commercial roof structure. Following an emergency inspection by fire rescue and safety authorities, the municipal government was forced to mandate a permanent, block-wide pedestrian exclusion zone around the base of the tower. High-strength protective scaffolding and heavy-duty nylon netting were erected over the sidewalks of the surrounding financial district to catch falling structural debris, the crown jewel of the city's skyline. A vertical neighborhood built for billionaires was physically roped off from the rest of the metropolis like an active industrial demolition site. Inside the tower, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. The homeowners' committee, realizing that their multi-million yuan investments were actively depreciating with every new crack that appeared on the drone scans, began mobilizing their immense personal resources. They hired top-tier forensic engineering firms from Beijing, independent materials, scientists from the national laboratories, and the most aggressive corporate litigators in the country. They spent millions of yuan constructing a meticulous, day-by-day digital twin of the tower, mapping every single poor receipt, every internal engineering warning, and every altered line of text in the pre-sale contracts. They weren't just building a technical case anymore. They were building an ironclad paper trail designed to prove that the developers didn't just build a defective high-rise. They deliberately sold a known, actively failing structural system to unsuspecting buyers while protecting their own capital from the fallout. And as that paper trail wound its way into the high courts of Shanghai, the true structural crisis was finally exposed for the world to see. The contagion of risk visual. The camera slowly pulls back from the Pinnacle Shanghai, revealing the surrounding urban canyon of the financial district. The bright lights of central skyscrapers fade into a deep, ominous twilight filter. Text scrolls on screen. Litigation ongoing. Designed to prevent. The music swells to a steady, driven Finalpulse narrator. Now, let's talk about where the water hits the rock. What this structural disaster does to the money, the credit, and the future of luxury vertical living across the region. This is the part of the file that almost no mainstream real estate outlet covers, but it is exactly where every high-rise owner in Asia, and frankly, every investor holding premium real estate, should be paying absolute, undivided attention. The fallout from the Pinnacle Shanghai is no longer confined to the 1,893 physical fractures running through its concrete facade. It has bled directly into the financial machinery that keeps these mega projects alive. Start with the banking and lending side. When a high-rise tower enters an active, multi-billion yuan legal war, alleging structural instability, material defects, and developer fraud, banking underwriters do something predictable. They slam the door. Commercial risk committees at major domestic lenders don't look at glossy marketing brochures. They look at structural litigation disclosures. A 118-story tower fighting a two-front war against its own buyers and environmental physics is a toxic asset. When financing tightens or completely freezes inside a premium building, the entire buyer pool undergoes a catastrophic collapse. It shrinks exclusively to cash purchasers, and cash purchasers in a high-risk market demand deep, unyielding discounts. The loan-to-value math grows uglier with every headline, leaving owners who took out mortgages holding an asset that is worth significantly less than the debt remaining on it. The loop of increasing costs insurance runs down the exact same track, only faster. A structural concrete skeleton with a documented history of deep-tier water infiltration and falling exterior debris is a perpetual claims generator. The property's master insurance policy gets repriced to reflect that extreme risk profile. Premium increases flow directly into monthly common management charges. Common charges flow straight into the building's permanent carrying costs. Higher carrying costs crush the property's remaining resale value. It is a closed, destructive loop, and every single turn of that loop is paid for by the people who bought the apartments, not the corporate entities that constructed them. This brings us to the structural realities facing the homeowners committee itself. There is an absolute legal reason. This board cannot simply back down or settle quietly for a superficial patch job. A luxury condominium committee owes an ironclad fiduciary duty to its asset owners. Once the independent structural engineers handed that committee a forensic defect list with the words "life safety hazard" written across the header, doing nothing or accepting a cosmetic compromise ceased to be a legal option. The board is mandated to pursue full structural accountability, which is why this fight hasn't faded into the background the way developers usually hope these scandals will. The Unlimited, the residents of the Pinnacle Shanghai, possess something that 99% of wronged property buyers across the globe never get: effectively unlimited litigation budgets. They own the highest concentration of private wealth in the city. They have retained the absolute best construction litigators, the most decorated material scientists, and a mountain of digital data their forensic experts have spent years assembling. If the most powerful, well-connected buyers in the country cannot force structural accountability with those immense resources, it means no high-rise buyer anywhere can. So, where does this leave the file? The defendants continue to deny any and all legal wrongdoing. The developers publicly insist the tower is an architectural triumph, a modern wonder that has performed remarkably well under harsh meteorological conditions. The municipal courts will ultimately decide who is right, a process that will likely take years of intense legal grinding through the judicial machinery. But step back from the legal documents, step back from the courtrooms, and look at the hard, physical facts that are already established and completely beyond dispute. The tallest residential structural concrete skeleton of its generation, 20 billion yuan in initial sales, a drone-assisted survey tracking 1,893 structural defects, a flagship penthouse that watched its valuation plummet by over 600 million yuan on its way to a desperate sale, and one quiet, three-word edit in a pre-sale contract: will prevent to design to prevent. An edit that a court is now being asked to read as a written confession of guilt. The megastructures in these files always tell the truth eventually. Concrete cannot lie. High-tensile steel cannot pretend it isn't rusting. Water always, invariably, finds the crack. And paper, it turns out, keeps a perfect, permanent record of exactly when the promises changed. The only question the Pinnacle Shanghai leaves us with is the one a jury may someday have to answer under oath, not whether the tower failed its owners. but whether it was always engineered to fail, and whether someone knew it the entire time. Closing out the file here is what I want to know from you in the comments. If you were sitting on that judicial panel, does a single changed phrase in a multi-page purchase contract prove a deliberate corporate cover-up? Or is that just corporate lawyers doing exactly what lawyers are paid to do? And the bigger question, if buyers with 100 million yuan budgets and the most powerful legal teams cannot protect themselves from a structural failure of this magnitude, what chance does an ordinary family buying a standard apartment have? Let me know your thoughts down below. I read every single comment, and the sharpest engineering take gets pinned to the top. This has been the Construction Files. Document